Hey everybody, we're back here live at the MFG5 Waterkant 2020, and right now I'm especially looking forward to another highlight of this year's event. We will have the next talk in actually a virtual environment, and the topic also will be how we could socialize in these virtual environments. We are super happy that our awesome curators Debbie and Dennis made a connection to the University of Glasgow and got Julie Williamson in as an expert into this talk, and they will present to you right now what does it mean, how can we get social in this virtual environments. If you would like to see this talk also in our virtual environment that Debbie and Dennis had set up for us, join us and then just go to the upcoming link. We will also share it in the chat. It will be waterkant-hub.sh. And in this hub, you can see how Julie Williamson is describing our possibilities into this virtual world. So without any further introduction, I'm super looking forward to the next 45 minutes and learn more how can we be social in the virtual world. Have fun. And Julie, the stage is yours.
Brilliant. So am I good to go? Ready to start?
Yeah.
Cool. So hi, everybody, and thank you for having me at the festival this week. I am very excited to be talking about VR and talking about VR from VR. So I am currently in a fully immersive virtual environment. I'm using the Oculus Quest to give this talk, and it's also a first for me. So I'm really excited to kind of see how this pans out as a VR enthusiast. This is a pretty exciting event. So I wanted to just start with a kind of brief introduction about myself. So thank you for the kind words. Yeah, I'm Julie Williamson, and I'm an academic at the University of Glasgow. We'll get to my next slide. So yeah, as you might guess by the introductions, I am a VR enthusiast. I'm a computing scientist, that's my background, and I've always been really interested in any types of unusual displays. So I work in virtual reality. I also work with a whole variety of head-mounted displays, shape-changing displays, spherical displays, any type of thing that's not your standard flat display. Then I am there and interested in how we could actually use this for kind of more engaging, more exciting experiences. So I've been really interested in VR for maybe the last a couple of years basically, and as an enthusiast, I do try to use this in as many situations as I can. So this is me here in my kind of home office. But one of the things that I think is very interesting about VR is while we're at home using it, that's one thing. It's a very private setting. Maybe I feel okay to put this strange display on my head and walk around. But for me, what's kind of more interesting is when we start incorporating this technology into more social settings. So in one case, I would really like to see VR out in public social settings, but also I'd like to see the VR that we use in our homes to be much more of a social nature. I don't want to see VR be something that is isolating and that is an individual experience, but rather something that enhances our social lives and our ways of kind of connecting with each other. So one of the situations which you might think is a little bit far-fetched, here's an example of something which I think is quite exciting. This is a few of my colleagues at an event that we held last spring. And one of the things that we wanted to look at was really what are some of the social challenges of using VR in public and social settings. Of course, as part of this workshop, we had to do some kind of in the wild thinking. So we took these headsets. This is an Oculus Go, which is a mobile wireless headset. You can put it on in any kind of setting and it will work. And we went out to public spaces. We went to kind of pedestrianized walkways. We went to bars and restaurants and different places where we thought, VR could have a place here. And so here we are sitting at a restaurant, kind of enjoying some socializing, and we all go into VR together. And as you might guess, this attracts quite a lot of attention. Of course, occluding your face is quite unusual in a public setting, and certainly having this kind of group experience like this, we attracted quite a lot of strange attention. So this type of setting, I think VR isn't quite there yet as far as a social technology, but I do see a lot of possibility, and I see this as a kind of starting point of something a bit more realistic. And I'd like to see VR becoming part of settings like this as we move forward. So how could VR actually become integrated into a social setting? What are the places where that would actually be something realistic, something acceptable, and something that audiences and attendees would be actually willing to do? And so I'm really interested for now how VR can play a role in festival settings. So what types of places is VR actually acceptable now to use? So one of the first projects that I want to talk about is an actual VR experience that combines performance and VR in a kind of group experience. So this is work I did with some of my colleagues here in Glasgow at the National Theatre Scotland and Glasgow School of Art. And 3 of us got together to create a kind of group experience inspired by the works of Berger. And in this experience, we actually have a number of built-out spaces that are designed for audiences to move through in a kind of guided live performance. And the first thing that happens when you come to this performance is you're greeted by a guide who gives you a white or a black marble. And we use this as a way of trying to guide the audience through the physical space, which becomes a virtual space. So after entering, you receive one of these tokens and you're guided to take a seat within the space. And within that space, there's a row of chairs facing 2 cubes, a white cube and a black cube. And what we wanted to do here was create different spaces that could become part of different virtual spaces. So after some live performance by one of the actors and some pre-recorded performance, depending on which marble you have in your hand, you go and you visit the correct cube, so a white or a black cube. And once in one of these spaces, that's when the experience starts to blend the virtual and the physical content. So let's say you go into the white cube first. One of the things that you would do is you take your seat in this group of chairs, as you see, facing all the audience members with their back to each other, and you're invited to enter VR. We had guides on hand to kind of facilitate this experience, because as you might guess, asking people to join the virtual space is something that is supported by a little bit of guidance, and it's something that if you've never used VR before, you might actually be a little bit nervous or unsure of how to proceed. But upon entering the white cube and donning the headset, you'll find yourself in a virtual environment that exactly mirrors this physical environment. And there's some pre-recorded performance that kind of unfolds in that space, some animation, some dialogue. But the thing that's interesting about the virtual space is that it's not confined by the physical restrictions that the built set is. So we can dynamically reconfigure that space. We can make it behave in ways that kind of defies the laws of physics, and we can really suspend the kind of disbelief around, is this real? Is this virtual? At what point have I left the real world and entered the virtual world? And when does it start behaving in ways that are unusual to me? And for me, that was one of the most exciting parts of this performance, was really trying to make a more continuous kind of transition between physical and virtual spaces. That could be one of the most jarring and maybe most unsettling parts of doing a virtual experience is that transition from physical to virtual. So once you have experienced the kind of performed content within the white cube, you then transition to the black cube. There's a closing monologue, and the performance is over. So this is an example where I think VR has a kind of a place for early adopters, and kind of really the kind of cutting edge technology can become part of a real experience. In this case, we have a performance that can facilitate 8 simultaneous audience members. So it's still a rather intimate performance. It's a small performance, but the idea is that you go somewhere together and experience digital content while you're physically co-located. And I think this is a great opportunity for a new type of social interaction where we could do something together but be immersed in a virtual environment individually. But there's a lot of different ways that virtual kind of socializing can happen. One of the other platforms that I'm really intrigued with, and actually I spend quite a lot of time in, is an application called VR Chat. So this is almost like the opposite of the first example that I've given. In this case, everybody is physically distributed. So you would be at home, in your living room, or wherever you use VR, but everyone comes together to the same shared virtual environment. And I think this is really exciting, especially in this time where we're not necessarily able to go physically see the people that we want to see. In something like VR Chat, we have this very open-ended space where we can socialize, where we can meet people and have a lot of new experiences that aren't possible when we're physically apart. And this is one of my favorite rooms in VR Chat. I'll give a kind of description of how the world works. So you have a kind of private area where you enter the virtual space. Like in the first example, I think this is a really important part of transitioning into the virtual world. It can be a very jarring experience. So you start in this kind of private, quiet space, which is your kind of home. From there, you can go into places which are kind of public promenades, a kind of concourse. This is a place where, you know, like walking down the street, you might run into people, you might see people, but it's not really a place to stop and chat. It's a kind of concourse or a promenade. This is a main part of VR Chat, where you might get some incidental interaction. But then you also have public rooms like this one. And in the public rooms, then that's a place where you might have different kinds of social interaction. So, and the rooms are themed to kind of support different types of social interaction as well. So this room, for example, is one of my favorite rooms, which is a kind of fireside retreat. And you see people do all sorts of interesting and strange interactions in a place like this. You have the fireside, you'll hear the crackling of the fire. It's kind of dark outside, and there's seats here that you can kind of sit around the fire at. And if you go to this room in VR Chat, most times you will see a group of people, for example, telling stories, sitting around the fire, and having these kind of incidental interactions. A little bit more quality content to them now that we have this setting. So people, strangers, will gather there and meet, and the types of norms and standards that come out because of the setting mean that we have this storytelling often unfolding. So this room is a really nice place to meet strangers and to have that type of social interaction. But of course, there's a lot of different types of rooms in VR Chat. And one of the other rooms that I quite like, I will talk about next, but first I want to show a little bit what the promenade looks like. So this is a little bit of more of a chaotic environment. As I say, think of it as a pedestrianized area where people will be coming and going and walking around. This is me in the bottom corner here. That's the avatar I usually take in VR Chat from an anime, Lost in Abyss. But so here you'll see a lot of just people milling around. There's no real kind of organization. It's just a walkway. So it feels very different from the fireside chat there. And this picture is actually taken from one of the large mirrors that exists in this space, which is also a really important part of VR spaces. Kind of environments that use mirrors in interesting ways help us to really see what we look like, what our avatar looks like, and to feel very embodied in that space. So we have very well-defined spaces like a fireside chat. We have the concourse, but then we also have this type of space, which I really like and facilitates a completely different type of social interaction. So this is taken from a room upstairs in an environment called the Great Pug. So this environment is a bar. It's a bar that has a kind of stage and kind of performance space upstairs. And this is really interesting because it has a whole different set of interactions that unfold here. So if you go into the Pug at any given point in time, there will be people sitting around the bar, having a chat, maybe flirting a bit, having conversations, meeting strangers, things you would do in a normal bar. People are often actually even drinking in their real environments when they hang out in the Pug. So you might find that you go and share a drink with someone in the virtual environment while you have an actual drink in your physical environment. People will often role play in these settings. So people often take on the role of bartender and will, chat the customers, serve them virtual drinks, and take on these kind of roles, which is really interesting to imagine going to pretend to work as a bartender in a virtual environment. The design of these environments facilitates that type of role play and that type of entertainment. And as I say, you will come across strangers and other people and sit and have as genuine a social interaction as you would have meeting strangers in any bar. But upstairs as well, because there's this performance space that exists there, you see all sorts of other types of social interactions unfolding. So one of the activities that's very common there is that people will perform stand-up comedy. And so you have the stage, you have this guy standing there on stage, and he's actually doing a set. This is something that, guessing from the quality, is something that is, like all stand-up, a kind of pre-written, rehearsed, refined piece of work. And everybody is standing in the audience, listening, laughing, heckling, doing all the normal things you would expect at a stand-up show. And it's because the environment kind of has this design that people naturally fall into these familiar social interactions. In the same way that if someone is running around and heckling in a way that's inappropriate or disrupting the performance, the people administering the room will kick them out the same way a bouncer might kick them out in a real comedy show. So you do have a kind of sense of order and social norms. And going into these spaces, you'll see that that people are actually participating in activities the same way you would in a physical space. And likewise, with real interactions, you often have these kind of easy and very kind of incidental interactions with strangers. Going to a bar, going to a stand-up show, anywhere that you might go by yourself or to primarily meet strangers, you'll have these kind of lightweight, kind of very surface level interactions, and that's great. But like a physical space, VR chat also has a huge number of private rooms, and in fact, the majority of interaction in VR chat goes on in private rooms. And these are groups that are known to each other, people who have longer term, maybe more long-standing friendships, or communities that have very specific norms and standards. So for example, for communities who are into avatar design and avatar development, they will have organized shows or fashion shows or catwalks, if you will, of avatars that they've designed as a way to show off their work. And this occurs most often in private rooms. So if you become a member of the community and you develop more lasting bonds and friendships, what types of interactions you have access to in VR chat is greatly expanded. The same way as in real life, if you develop meaningful community groups and friends, the types of interactions you can expect in different places is dramatically changed. So VR chat really mirrors a lot of the things that we desire in our physical lives, and I think it's a really interesting platform for socializing in VR when we are physically distant. The next example.
Oh no, I think Julie might have disconnected from the server. We'll try to get her back as soon as possible. Oh wait, I'm actually here. Surprise! I'll just pause the presentation for now, and hope that Julie can come back very, very, very soon. As you as you just witnessed, we kind of crashed the server because everybody is so eager to get into the virtual reality. We're having some sustained technical difficulties, but we're trying to get Julie onto Vimeo now, so we can actually kind of like finish our chat with her. Can we get Julie's audio track on stream as well? That would be lovely, so I can have a little bit of a chat with her about her research and about the things she's doing, and also to congratulate her on having an awesome presentation in VR, from VR, for VR. It doesn't need to be video because probably she has got VR face currently. If you don't know what VR face is, it's when you have a VR headset on for a period of time and then suddenly have to face people from the real world again. Great, I think we've got Julie's audio here now as well. Julie?
Me?
Oh yes, Julie, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm so sorry, we crashed it, and now that we've tried to reload it in the background, things are going awfully wrong. But the first part of your presentation was awesome. Just having you stand there with your hands and giving a talk from VR about VR and socializing within it. I was just about to say how we met over your research and your love for VR, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about socializing in VR. How does it feel for you to go into VR and start socializing in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that really mirrors the real world, because yes, you can have these, light interactions with strangers. I mean, you could do that now. I mean, if you go and just meet random people, you'll have these very surface level interactions, but you are really able to have kind of deeper, meaningful interactions if you spend time investing in a community, or if you meet people who you already know and have an existing relationship with. I think you can still have those very meaningful interactions, and it's the same as with a physical one. You need to invest the time and commit to something, which is can make that a much better interaction than just random chatter.
Yeah, it's so good that you say that you have to commit to it, because you're absolutely right. It's a commitment, isn't it, to kind of actually engage in the virtual world, especially if you go into VR chat, because it can be quite overwhelming at first. Maybe for people who haven't been to VR chat, maybe you can kind of talk them through your first experience of it. Maybe that might be quite an interesting story.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things where, at least for me, one of the first things I wanted to do was to find an avatar body that I felt comfortable in. And you think, well, what should I do? I mean, in VR chat, one of the affordances of that platform is that you can do anything. So it doesn't have to be a humanoid, VR avatar. It could be anything. And so people are every imaginable thing, and it gives you so much choice that you kind of don't know maybe what to do. But so I chose this kind of anime girl avatar. I'm a girl, so I wanted to be that way in VR, and kind of looking down and seeing this body and seeing how people respond to you is the strangest part about being in a virtual environment the first time.
Yeah, we had just last Friday, we had a talk with Dr. Sophia Seinfeld, who you actually introduced to me and Debbie. And she was talking about her research and embodiment, and how for the brain, it's quite easy to believe in having a different body quite quickly, especially if there's, and you mentioned that in your presentation as well, especially if there's a mirror where you can suddenly kind of, your brain goes like, oh, I'm moving my hand in VR, but I'm also doing it in the real world, so this body must be mine, and you take ownership of that quite quickly. Yeah, that's such good research. And your research, when we met you, you had like research kind of like kind of thinking about public exhibitions and how people interact with these kind of exhibitions. But now it's almost like, now you've gone digital. Now, how do we interact with kind of computer interfaces and computers and virtual avatars in kind of virtuality? Where's your research taking you next is kind of like the burning question.
Yeah, I mean, the last bit of the talk, which just got truncated, but basically one of the things I really care a lot about entertainment and kind of performance, but we're also now looking at kind of how a larger festival or conference or something like what you're doing here, trying to have some sustained longer term interaction. How do you actually start to create something that's more than just a single experience or single event? And reproduce the things that people like about in-person events, but hopefully also add some new things that that a virtual event is uniquely able to provide. So how do you facilitate the real connections between different people, and also give people things like the confidence to maybe go up and meet someone who maybe in a first face-to-face interaction that would be impossible or impractical or too nerve-wracking or something. Could we, I really like the comment that was earlier, that could we break down some of those barriers and make things more equal? I think that's something that VR could do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. It's so great that we've got like people looking into this and actually researching this stuff in order to get some kind of real answers. And because for me and Debbie as practitioners in VR, it's so important to look at your kind of research and the whole field in order to do stuff that actually feels good. And because now we can kind of almost create first memories that will be kind of like VR only memories. So, which also means that we will be nostalgic towards VR spaces all of a sudden, which is, I'm so excited about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by that as well, around the idea that the memories that you generate in VR actually trigger the kind of same parts of your brain as if they were physical memories. And so looking back on them is really interesting. How do we remember our lives if we don't necessarily differentiate between virtual experiences and face-to-face ones? It's a question for what is the future of this field, and how it has a different way of integrating into our daily lives than other technology. It actually becomes integrated in how we remember, how we experience things.
Yeah, and that makes a completely new human being, basically. Yeah, it's super exciting. So thanks so much for taking part in this experiment. Thanks so much for your research. Thanks so much for kind of joining us in VR and giving this a go. And it was really stunning to see. Unfortunately, it didn't quite go up until the end, but that's our fault. Sorry. I'm gonna
No, I mean, it was a real pleasure to speak in VR, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Great. Okay. Fantastic. I'll be back at 6 with another speaker. But for now, I'm gonna hand back to Alex in the studio, in the real world studio. Thanks so much again, Julie, and talk to you soon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Oh, sorry. Now I'm back again. Now I have unmuted myself. So this was basically the sweetest fault that I've ever seen, because it didn't feel like it. There were so many layers onto it. First, we had this perspective that you were speaking in real life from Glasgow through Kiel to us in our studio. Then we had these different layers: what is real in the studio, what is going on in this virtual hub, and all of it mixed together was like a super nice experience. And it was so futuristic that it doesn't matter if it was not completely as it planned or not. And yeah, so far I'm still absolutely in love with it. I would like to do it all over again. And so we would be super happy to kind of repeat it sooner or later. So right now we kind of stick to the topic because today is our virtual day, so to say. And if you would like to join us again, feel free to do so at 6 p.m. We will have again Debbie and Dennis talking with some other very interesting guests also about VR. The topic will be a playful approach to solving serious problems. And we will have for this virtually on stage Janneke Wertmeister and Owen Harris. So please join us again. As always, you can still join us in our virtual hub, or you can also join us on live.waterkant.sh. It was a pleasure to have you, and see you soon again. Bye-bye.